My phone rang right after lunch, when the house was quiet and the only sound was the dishwasher finishing its cycle. I almost didn't answer. Unknown number. But something in me said pick up. "Mrs. Carlyle?" a man asked, and his voice was careful, like he was stepping around broken glass. "Yes, this is she." There was a pause. Paper shuffling. Then he cleared his throat. "This is Daniel Mercer. I'm with Mercer and Lane. We handle your family's accounting." I knew the name. He'd been in the background of my life for years. Not at dinners, not at holidays, just the guy who sent neat reports and polite reminders. "Hi, Daniel," I said. "Is everything okay?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Yes. Yes, it's fine. I just wanted to confirm you were aware of the transfer that went through yesterday." "The transfer?" I repeated, like the word didn't belong in my mouth. "The movement from your primary brokerage into the new management account," he said, still sounding uncomfortable. "A little over 2 million. My hand tightened around the phone. "I'm sorry," I said. "What new management account?" He went quiet. Not fully quiet. I could hear his breathing, like he'd realized he'd said too much. "Mrs. Carlyle," he said gently, "I was under the impression this had already been discussed with you." "It hasn't," I said, and my voice came out calmer than I felt. "I haven't approved anything." He hesitated. "Your son signed the authorization. Under the updated financial authority documents we received last week." I stared at the sunlight on my kitchen counter, like it might explain what he meant. "Updated authority documents," I repeated. "Daniel, I'm alive. I'm fine. I'm sitting in my own kitchen." "Yes," he said quickly. "Of course. I apologize. I assumed you knew." I could feel something cold settle in my chest. Not panic, not rage, just that quiet feeling you get when you walk into a room and realize everyone else has been talking without you. "So my son moved money," I said slowly, "and your office thought that was normal." "I didn't say that," he answered, almost whispering now. "I only wanted to make sure there wasn't any confusion on your end." There was already confusion. Thick, heavy confusion, like fog. "Who asked you to call me?" I asked. He didn't answer right away, and that told me enough. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "I truly am. If you'd like, I can email you copies of the documents we have on file." "Yes," I said, still staring at the counter. "Please do that." "All right," he said softly. "Again, I'm sorry to have upset you." "It's not your fault," I heard myself say, and that was the strange part, I meant it. We hung up, and I didn't move for a full minute. I just stood there with the phone in my hand, listening to the silence in my own home. It felt like something had been decided, something big, like my life had been sorted into folders while I was still living it. And I couldn't shake the uneasy thought that I wasn't supposed to find out this way.
Welcome to Life Voices, where family drama turns into late-life justice. Subscribe for more emotional family stories. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from.
After that call, I told myself not to spiral. People move money around in families like ours. There are accounts inside accounts. Trusts, sub-trusts, vehicles, whatever word they use to make it sound harmless. I've signed plenty of things over the years without reading every line. I've also paid people to read the lines for me. So I went on with my day. I made tea. I answered a few emails. I looked at the roses out back and thought about pruning them soon. Normal things. The kind of things you do when you want your brain to stay in the present. But it didn't feel normal anymore. That evening, my daughter, Allison, came by with her husband and the kids. They do that a lot. We live close, and our house is the easy stop because we have the space, the snacks, and I'm usually here. I was in the kitchen when they walked in, and I heard Allison say, "Just text him the confirmation. He'll take it from there." I stepped out with a smile. "Text who?" Allison didn't jump. She didn't look guilty. She just looked busy. "Oh," she said, like she'd forgotten I was in the house. "We're just coordinating schedules. Don't worry about it." I waited for more, but she was already turning to her son, wiping something off his cheek, asking if he'd washed his hands. "Don't worry about it." That phrase showed up everywhere after the call. The next morning, I had my usual breakfast in the sunroom. Same routine, coffee, fruit, the paper on my iPad. My son, Brian, walked in mid-call, talking into his earbuds like I wasn't there. "Yeah, no, that's fine," he said. Just put it through. We're good. He paced, nodding, making that focused face he always makes when he's handling something. Then he saw me and lifted one finger. Hold on, like I was a child who'd wandered into his office. He finished the call and smiled like nothing happened. Morning, Mom. Morning, I said. Who was that? He didn't even hesitate. Oh, just a guy. Nothing important. A guy. Brian has never called anyone a guy unless he wanted the conversation to end. I kept my voice light. Are we still doing the charity gala table this year? I got the save the date. He waved his hand like he was brushing crumbs off a counter. Yeah, we'll handle it. No stress. I stared at him. I've handled it for 15 years. I know, he said quickly, still smiling. And you've done an amazing job. But you shouldn't have to anymore. It sounded like a compliment. It landed like a door closing. Later that week, I walked into the den and found Brian and Allison sitting close together on the couch, heads bent over a laptop. They both looked up too fast, like teenagers caught with something they shouldn't be doing. Allison clicked the screen dark. I didn't even ask what it was. I just said, "Am I interrupting?" "No," Allison said immediately. Too immediate. Of course not. Brian stood up, already shifting his body between me and the laptop. "We're just going over some stuff." "Boring stuff." "What stuff?" I asked, still calm. "Estate things," he said, like it was a category of weather. "Just practical." He said, estate, the way people say oil change. Routine. Necessary. Nothing personal. I nodded and walked to the bar cart like I needed a glass of water. My hands felt steady, but I could feel my face trying to understand something it didn't want to understand yet. After that, I started noticing the small changes. The invisible ones. My house manager, who's been with us for years, stopped asking me about weekend guests and started texting Allison instead. The gardener asked Brian about the front hedges even though I'm the one who cares about the way they look. Packages arrived and went straight upstairs before I saw them. And every time I asked a question, I got the same gentle response. "We've got it. Don't worry. It's taken care of." Nobody was cruel. Nobody raised their voice. That was what made it feel so strange. Like they were all acting from a shared script, and I was the only one who hadn't gotten a copy. One afternoon, I came into the kitchen while Allison was talking to our housekeeper in a low voice. The second Allison saw me, her sentence cut off midair. They both smiled. Too polite. "Everything okay?" I asked. "All good," Allison said, and reached for her phone like it suddenly needed her attention. "Just household stuff." Household stuff. Another door closing. That night, I lay in bed and tried to list reasons that made sense. Maybe they were planning a surprise. Maybe Brian was handling taxes. Maybe Allison was organizing something for the kids. I tried to be generous because I raised them to be good people. But under all that reasoning was a quieter truth I couldn't ignore. They weren't acting like I was sick. They were acting like I was already gone. And the hardest part wasn't the money or the paperwork I still hadn't seen. It was the way they kept making it sound like relief. Like my presence in my own life was something they were kindly taking off my hands. The email from Daniel, the accountant, landed the next morning. Subject line: updated authorization, confirmation copies. Even that wording made my stomach dip. Confirmation of what, exactly? Like I'd already nodded along and just needed a receipt. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it while my coffee cooled, telling myself I was overreacting. That I'd probably find something boring and reasonable. A form I'd signed at the kitchen island months ago and forgot. A routine update. A technical detail. That's what I wanted it to be. But once I clicked, there were attachments. 3 PDFs. Clean names, clean formatting. The kind of paperwork that always looks harmless until it isn't. I printed them. I don't know why. I could have read them on the screen, but something about ink on paper feels more real. More binding. The printer hummed in the hallway, spitting out pages while I stood there with my arms folded, listening like it was telling me something. I carried the stack into the sunroom and laid it out on the table where we usually play cards with the grandkids. I smoothed the corners like that would smooth what was happening. The first document was a brokerage authorization. It showed a transfer request into a managed account platform. It didn't say 2 million in big letters, but the numbers were there in tidy rows. Date, amount, account ending digits. And then, right under authorized by, was Brian's signature. Not mine. I felt my face go hot, then cold. I flipped the page like maybe the next page would explain the mistake. The second document was what Daniel had called updated financial authority. That phrase had bothered me since the call, because it sounded like something you update when someone's not capable anymore. The heading was dry: limited power of attorney, financial management. I read the first paragraph twice because my brain kept trying to make it say something else. It listed me as the principal. It listed Brian as the agent. It was signed, dated, witnessed, and there it was, in plain language, like it was nothing. Effective immediately, not upon incapacity, not upon death. Immediately. My hand actually lifted off the paper, like it had heat coming off it. I sat back, trying to remember. Trying to place the day. The week. A moment where I might have signed something like this without realizing it. Had Brian handed me papers after a dinner? Had Allison put something in front of me while talking fast? Had I been tired? Distracted? I'm not naive. I know how people slip things into a stack. Just sign here, Mom. And you sign because you trust them and because you don't want to be difficult. But I couldn't remember signing this. And that alone made me feel unstable. Like the floor moved half an inch and my body didn't get the memo. I stood up and walked to my desk in the study. I keep a file drawer for important things: wills, insurance, the house deed, old tax returns. The boring backbone of a life. I pulled it open and started flipping, searching for anything with that same title. Nothing. No copy. No earlier draft. No cover letter. Just silence in a drawer that should have been full of reassurance. I went back to the papers and looked closer. My name was typed correctly. Address correct. Social ending digits correct. The witnesses were names I didn't recognize. Not our longtime attorney. Not our neighbor. Not anyone I would have chosen. My throat got tight, not because I was about to cry, but because I felt like I was reading about a woman who wasn't me. Then I remembered something small from the week before, an email notification I'd cleared without thinking. A security update from the bank. I'd assumed it was routine. I picked up my phone and searched my inbox for the bank's name. There it was. Your account access has been updated. I opened it. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't say, someone is taking over your life. It said something polite and corporate. A new authorized user had been added. A new device had been registered. Certain permissions had been changed. I stared at that message longer than I stared at the legal papers. Because this one wasn't theory. This one wasn't language. This was action. I tried to log into my banking app, just to settle my nerves. The password didn't work. I tried again, slower. Same result. I hit forgot password, and the app asked me to confirm my identity using a phone number that wasn't mine. That's when I felt it, real fear, but quiet, like a hand closing around my spine. I wasn't locked out of a random account. I was being redirected around my own money. I sat down at the edge of the chair like my legs didn't trust the room anymore. I looked at the stack again and there was no way to misunderstand it now. This wasn't planning for the future. This wasn't, in case something happens. This was control, effective immediately, while I was still hosting dinners and making appointments and paying staff and living my normal life. They hadn't waited for me to be gone. They'd simply started acting like I was. I didn't confront them right away. I waited 2 days, not because I was scared, because I needed to hear my own thoughts clearly before I heard theirs. On Sunday evening, I asked them both to come by. Just the three of us. No spouses, no grandchildren, no distractions. They arrived together like they'd coordinated it. We sat in the den. Same room where I'd seen them bent over that laptop. I had the documents on the coffee table, neatly stacked. I didn't wave them around. I didn't accuse. I just looked at my son first. Brian, I said calmly, why do you have financial authority over my accounts effective immediately? He didn't look shocked. He looked prepared. Allison shifted slightly in her seat but stayed quiet. Brian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The posture of someone explaining something reasonable. Mom, he said gently, this isn't what you think. I almost smiled at that. That sentence never means anything good. Then tell me what it is, I said. He exhaled slowly. It's practical, that's all. We've been talking about long-term planning. It just makes sense to streamline things. Streamline what? I asked. Access, oversight, coordination. You have a lot of moving parts. Investments, properties, the foundation. It's complicated. I held his gaze. It's been complicated for 30 years. I've managed it. Allison jumped in, her voice soft but firm. You've managed it beautifully. Nobody's saying you haven't. Then why was I removed from direct control of my own accounts? I asked. You weren't removed, Brian said quickly. It's shared authority. I can't log into my banking app, I replied. That made them glance at each other. That's just a technical reset, he said. We updated security. It's safer this way. Safer. For who? I asked. Silence. Not hostile. Just tight. Allison reached for my hand like I was the one who needed comforting. Mom, please don't take this the wrong way, she said. You shouldn't have to stress about this stuff anymore. I'm not stressed, I said quietly. You say that, Brian replied, still measured, still calm, but we've seen you. The late night calls, the paperwork piles, you don't have to carry it all. Carry it, like I was struggling. I wasn't drowning, I said. You didn't ask if I wanted help. We're helping, Allison said. That's not the same as asking. They both looked at me then, and I saw it clearly for the first time. Not cruelty, not greed, at least not openly. Control, the calm confidence of people who had already decided what was best. Brian leaned back. Mom, we're not taking anything from you. You still own everything. This is just structure. Protection. What if something happens suddenly? I'm healthy, I said. Of course you are, he replied quickly. But life changes fast. The way he said it felt rehearsed. And if nothing changes? I asked. He hesitated. Then nothing changes, he said, but his tone didn't match the words. I let a few seconds pass. I wanted them to sit in it. You did this without telling me, I said finally. We were going to, Allison answered. When? Soon. I nodded slowly. After the transfer? Neither of them answered. The room felt smaller, even though it's the largest room in the house. Brian's voice softened even more. Mom, you have to understand. This isn't emotional. It's logistical. We're just preparing. Preparing for what? They kept using language that sounded responsible, mature, sensible, and yet I felt like a board member being gently phased out of her own company. I built this, I said quietly. After your father passed, I kept everything steady. You know that. We know, Allison said quickly. And we're grateful. Grateful. The word landed strangely. But things evolve, Brian added. And it's better to transition while everything's calm instead of waiting for a crisis. Transition. There it was. The real word. Not help. Not protection. Transition. They weren't talking about assistance. They were talking about succession. And they were talking like it had already started. I looked at both of them, my children, sitting in my house, explaining my life back to me. And the most unsettling part? They truly believed they were being kind. No raised voices, no accusations, no threats, just steady pressure wrapped in soft tones. You don't have to worry anymore, Allison said again. I realized then that they weren't trying to take my money. They were trying to take my responsibility, my authority, my relevance, and they were offering relief in exchange. I nodded once. All right, I said calmly. If you think this is best. Their shoulders relaxed at the same time. They thought the conversation was over. But something inside me had just gone very, very quiet. After that conversation, I didn't argue again. I didn't demand explanations. I didn't cry. On the outside, I became agreeable. If Brian mentioned reviewing allocations, I nodded. If Allison said, we'll coordinate with the advisor, I smiled and said, sounds good. I stopped asking follow-up questions. That was the part they didn't expect. At first, they seemed relieved. The air in the house felt lighter, almost cheerful. Brian came by more often, walking through rooms with quiet ownership, like he was measuring things. Allison started mentioning future plans in front of me without lowering her voice. Once everything's consolidated, it'll be easier, she said one afternoon while scrolling through her phone at my kitchen island. Easier for who? I almost asked. But I didn't. I just poured more coffee. Silence is uncomfortable for people who expect resistance. When you argue, they know where you stand. When you protest, they can push back. But when you simply observe, it unsettles them. I watched. I noticed how Brian began speaking about the house in long-term terms. When we eventually update this wing, he'd say, not if, when. I noticed how Allison casually referred to the investment accounts as the portfolio, not mom's accounts. Language shifts tell you everything. One evening, they were both here again, sitting at the dining table with papers spread out. I walked in quietly. No one rushed to close the folders this time. We're just organizing, Brian said, almost automatically. I know, I replied softly. That answer threw him off. I could see it in the way his eyes searched my face, looking for tension that wasn't there. There wasn't anger in me anymore. Not in the way they expected. There was clarity. They had decided I needed to be eased out. Gradually, politely, as if stepping back was a kindness. So I let them believe I agreed. I began excusing myself earlier in the evenings. You two continue, I'd say. I'm going upstairs. They'd exchange quick glances after I left. I could feel it even from the hallway. One afternoon, Brian stopped by unexpectedly. He stood in the study doorway while I was sorting old photographs. You okay? He asked. Yes, I said without looking up. You've been quiet. I've always been quiet, I replied. He stepped further into the room. I just want you to know this isn't about pushing you out. I met his eyes then. I never said it was, I answered. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Silence stretched between us. For the first time, he didn't control it. Because I wasn't fighting him. I wasn't defending myself. I was letting him sit with his own choices. And slowly, something shifted. They began checking my reactions more closely. Watching for signs. Waiting for an explosion that never came. Allison started asking small, careful questions. You're happy with how things are structured, right? Yes, I'd say evenly. You don't feel overwhelmed? No. The less I resisted, the more uncertain they became. It's strange how power works. When you stop trying to hold it tightly, it changes shape. One morning, I overheard them in the hallway. She's taking it too well, Allison whispered. She knows it's logical, Brian replied, though his voice didn't sound convinced. They weren't worried about my anger anymore. They were worried about my calm. And that was the first time since the accountant's call that I felt steady. Not because I trusted them, but because I finally understood the game. They believed authority had already shifted. They believed I'd accepted the transition. What they didn't realize was this. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's preparation. The following Tuesday, I called my attorney. Not the firm Brian had used for the updated authority. My attorney, Harold Klein, has handled my legal affairs for 22 years. He drafted our original estate plan when my husband was still alive. He knows where every structure came from and why. I didn't tell my children about the appointment. I scheduled it for 10 a.m., the hour when Brian is usually in meetings and Allison is at Pilates. I've learned their rhythms. Funny how that works. When I walked into Harold's office, nothing felt dramatic. Same leather chairs, same quiet receptionist, same framed degrees on the wall. He stood when I entered. Margaret, he said warmly. Good to see you. Good to see you. Not, we'll take it from here. Not, don't stress yourself. We sat down. I placed the copied documents in front of him. I need you to explain something to me, I said calmly. He read in silence for several minutes. His expression didn't change much, but I've known him long enough to see the tightening around his eyes. Did you sign this knowingly? He asked. No, I said, and I'm not incapacitated. He nodded once. They used a different notary, he said quietly. I noticed. He folded his hands. You understand this gives your son immediate authority over a significant portion of your financial life. I understand that now, I replied. There was no panic in my voice. Just clarity. Harold leaned back. What would you like to do? That question mattered. Not what happened, not how do we fix it. What would you like to do? I sat with it for a moment. I'd like to review everything, I said. Every structure, every trust, every control point. We spent the next 2 hours going through documents I hadn't looked at in years. Trust agreements, beneficiary designations, voting rights in holding entities. Layers I had built slowly over decades. Harold explained where authority currently flowed. Where it could flow, where it could be redirected. I asked specific questions, calm ones. If I wanted oversight to require dual consent, could that be arranged? Yes. If I wanted distribution timing adjusted? Yes. If I wanted management discretion separated from beneficiary status? He gave me a small look. Absolutely. We didn't discuss motives. We discussed mechanics. Before I left, I signed a request to freeze certain authorizations pending review. Temporary, quiet, legal, nothing dramatic, just careful. Over the next week, I returned twice more. Always mid-morning, always alone. We drafted amendments. We restructured certain roles. We created contingencies that hadn't existed before. I didn't remove my children. I refined access. Authority shifted from automatic to conditional. From assumed to earned. Some powers required independent oversight. Some distributions required time delays. Some management rights were reassigned to neutral parties. Not out of spite, out of balance. Each time I signed a document, I felt something settle inside me. Not revenge, not satisfaction, stability. Harold never asked why I was making changes. He didn't need to. On my last visit, he slid the final folder across the table. Everything will be executed within the week, he said. Quietly, I nodded. Will they be notified? I asked. Only where legally required. The structural changes won't be obvious until someone attempts to exercise authority. That was enough. When I walked back to my car, the air felt unusually clear. Not lighter, just sharper. At home, nothing had changed on the surface. Brian still discussed future planning. Allison still spoke about streamlining. I still nodded, but inside, the foundation had shifted again. Only this time, I was the one who moved it. And no one knew yet. There was one more thing I asked Harold before I left that day. If someone tries to override these changes, I said carefully, will I be notified? Yes, he answered without hesitation. Immediately, I held his gaze for a second longer than usual. Good, because that was the piece I hadn't had before. Awareness. For weeks, decisions had moved around me quietly. Documents filed, access granted, money transferred, all under the language of protection. Now, if anything shifted, I would see it first. On my way home, I stopped at the bank in person. I hadn't done that in years. I asked to speak privately with the branch manager. I updated passwords, contact numbers, verification settings, nothing dramatic, just small corrections. That evening, Brian called. Hey, Mom, quick question, he said lightly. Did something change with the authorization request today? We hit a minor delay. I stirred my tea slowly. I'm reviewing everything, I said. Just being thorough. A pause. Oh, he replied. Okay, just let me know if you need help. I will, I said. And for the first time, I meant something different by those words. I didn't rush. I didn't explain. I simply let the silence sit between us, steady and controlled. And on the other end of the line, I could hear it. Uncertainty. The reveal didn't happen in a dramatic courtroom. It happened at my own dining table. Brian had asked for a meeting. Just to finalize some structural updates, he said. His tone was confident again, like the brief delay had been a simple glitch. Allison came too. They both brought folders. I made coffee. We sat down in the late afternoon light, the long windows casting soft lines across the table. Everything looked calm, ordinary. Brian opened his folder first. So, he began, we're consolidating oversight under the management account, and once the final authorization clears, we'll have full discretion to optimize allocation. Full discretion. He slid a paper toward me. Just acknowledging awareness. I didn't touch it. I think there may be some confusion, I said evenly. Brian frowned slightly. About what? About discretion. Allison's eyes shifted to him. The authority documents were updated weeks ago, Brian said carefully. We already. They were, I agreed. And then they were reviewed. Silence. He blinked. Reviewed by who? My attorney. The air changed. Not loud, not explosive, just a quiet tightening. Allison straightened in her chair. Mom, we thought you were comfortable with the structure. I was comfortable with understanding it, I replied. Brian's jaw moved slightly. There shouldn't be any changes that affect execution. There are, I said. I reached for my folder then. Calmly. No rush. I've amended the estate structure. Management authority now requires independent co-authorization. Distribution schedules have been revised. Certain discretionary powers have been reassigned to a neutral fiduciary. Neither of them spoke for several seconds. They were reading the words, but what they were really reading was the shift. You added oversight? Brian asked quietly. Yes. Without telling us? I met his eyes. The previous adjustments were made without telling me. Allison swallowed. But this complicates things. It clarifies things, I answered. Brian leaned back, the confidence from earlier gone now. Mom, this changes the control structure entirely. I'm aware. He looked at the document again, slower this time. So we can't move funds independently. Correct. We can't restructure assets without secondary approval. Correct. And the timeline for full transition is no longer immediate, I finished. Silence filled the room, not anger, not yelling, just the heavy understanding that what they assumed was settled, wasn't. Allison finally spoke, softer than before. Why would you do this? It wasn't an accusation. It was confusion. I thought about answering with something sharp. Something dramatic. Instead, I kept it simple. Because I'm still here. That landed harder than anything else could have. Brian looked down at his hands. For the first time in weeks, he didn't have a prepared sentence ready. After a moment, he cleared his throat. Is this permanent? It depends, I said. On what? On trust. Neither of them responded to that. What struck me most wasn't outrage. It was calculation. They weren't asking why I felt hurt. They weren't asking what would make me feel secure. They were scanning the structure for weak points. How do we fix it? Brian asked finally. There it was. Not, how do we repair this? Not, how do we make this right? How do we fix it? I folded my hands on the table. There's nothing broken, I said calmly. The quiet that followed was different from before. It wasn't confident. It wasn't controlled. It was uncertain. For the first time since the accountant's call, they were no longer ahead of me. And in that silence, they understood something I had already accepted. The estate no longer moved without me. Part 7, The Reveal, continued. Brian stood up and walked toward the window, hands on his hips. Not angry, just recalculating. This creates delays, he said after a moment. Opportunities can be time-sensitive. Then we'll evaluate them carefully, I replied. Allison looked at me differently now. Not like I was fragile. Not like I needed easing out. Like I was present. You don't trust us, she said quietly. I considered that. I don't trust being removed from decisions about my own life, I answered. That was the most honest thing I'd said all evening. Brian turned back toward the table. We weren't removing you. We were protecting the structure. From what? I asked. He didn't have an answer. Because there hadn't been a crisis. There hadn't been a decline. There had only been assumption. Assumption that control would transition smoothly if I didn't resist. Assumption that I'd accept relief in place of relevance. The folders stayed open on the table, but no one touched them. The energy in the room wasn't explosive. It was hollow. Allison finally closed her folder slowly. So what happens now? Now, I said evenly, we operate with clarity. Brian studied me for a long moment. And I could see it in his face, not resentment. Realization. The structure had changed. But more than that, the balance had changed. And for the first time, they weren't entirely sure where they stood. After that meeting, the house felt the same. But it wasn't. We still had Sunday dinners. We still talked about school schedules and vacations. Nothing exploded. No one stormed out. From the outside, we were still a stable, successful family. But something quiet had settled between us. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped oversharing. I let them come to me instead of positioning themselves around me. Because in the end, this was never about $2 million. It wasn't even about control of accounts. It was about relevance. About whether I was still seen as the head of my own life, or a role slowly being retired. Inheritance doesn't just reveal who gets what. It reveals who thinks you're already gone. I chose peace. But I also chose boundaries. And sometimes, that's the only legacy that really matters.
Your voice matters here. Share your story below. Subscribe for more emotional family stories. Have you ever lived through something similar? Share in the comments. Your voice matters here.